Hey guys, welcome back to Before You Die, a series based around not only reviewing games, but diving into them on a deeper level. Because you see, lots of games have good gameplay, audio, storytelling, and characters, but not all games have soul. So today, we're here to answer one simple question. Should you play Borderlands 4 before you die?
But I know just what you running from. And what matters is the rules matters is the. But I know just what you running from.
Quick update too before we get started here on the video. Just so you guys know, I've spent almost all of my time playing Borderlands 4 on PC so far, but a lot of the B-roll you'll see for this video will be from my time on PS5 Pro with a much lower level character, but in an aspect ratio that is a lot better for most of you watching. I'll definitely include a little bit of ultra-wide monitor gameplay as well for my PC, just so you can see some higher level areas and zones, and if you do see any random switches, that's why. I just wanted to let you know. Anyways, let's get back to it. What better place to start with Borderlands than with the most important part about this whole series? Is it fun? Now, this may come as a surprise for any of you who watched my previous and first review for the Before You Die series on God of War, because then you know that for me personally, story, narrative, and world building are what I like most in games. But in the case of Borderlands, and by proxy Borderlands 4, let's be real, most people aren't here for that, and neither am I. Because the truly magic part about these titles, and why I loved them as a kid and have played all of them since, is that Borderlands is just so damn fun. That gameplay loop of running into armies of bad guys and using ridiculously overpowered guns and builds never gets old, and more than ever, Borderlands 4 fulfills the fantasy. Guns look and sound great, and no matter what you're using, it's satisfying to pull the trigger and watch either lasers, bullets, bees, or literal potatoes come out the end of the barrel. Enemies too react a good amount in combat, screaming obscene profanities or shattering into a bloody mess as limbs fall right off the body into a soup of carnage. There's just no way around it. Shooting, moving around in, and playing Borderlands 4 starts fun, it stays fun, and is the type of game that will probably never not be fun, even after hundreds of hours played. The core mechanics on offer here, what the series relies on most, considering you are supposed to spend hundreds or even thousands of hours grinding for new gear and levels, is fantastic. And it all leads to a sense that spending any amount of time here is really worth it. For example, let's just dive a little deeper into one thing, that being the movement. Previously in other Borderlands games, movement was fun and depending on the build, even fast-paced, but for the most part, it was very limited. You could never double jump, slide, and trying to summon a vehicle sometimes required you running miles to the nearest catch-a-ride station just to get to where you wanted to go. Sure, when you got to an objective, it was always fun, but getting there was often a test in patience. Borderlands 4, by comparison, even from the very first second you play, is frenetic, fluid, fast, and impactful. Every character can now jump multiple times in the air, glide seamlessly from ledge to ledge, quickly slide down steep hills, instantly summon their vehicle almost anywhere, dash in every direction to avoid attacks, grapple onto ledges or specific points to fly through the air, or even grapple explosives in the environment to throw them right back at enemies. And that's not even to mention that by doing every vault in game, your character also unlocks very powerful movement upgrades like more stamina or faster regen and lower downtimes. Level 50 characters with full upgrades feel drastically different from the starter ones because of this, and by the end of the game, I was often getting into engagements that reminded me more of playing Doom Eternal than any of the previous Borderlands games, and I mean that as a huge compliment. I mean, seriously, just take a couple seconds looking at some of this new combat system and tell me it doesn't make you want to instantly boot up the game and play. Trying to go back and play any of the other Borderlands games now after something like this in comparison makes them immediately feel archaic and lacking, and the biggest attributor to that is without a doubt the movement. It really does make a massive impact on the fun factor of the series, and allows for more varied quests, including parkour sections or secrets to find in the open world, another new staple of this series, which we'll talk about in an upcoming section. But regardless, the biggest and first compliment I want to give Borderlands 4 is that it's just fun. I had an absolute blast playing through this title alone and with friends online, and I can say without a doubt that if you even vaguely find FPS games enjoyable, then from a purely moment-to-moment perspective, you will adore Borderlands 4. Its massively improved movement has honed-in gameplay that feels punchy, and despite using the same enemies over and over throughout each zone, they all feel fun to fight because of how crazy the guns and powers can get. And speaking of guns and powers, to me at least, it's the thing that keeps me playing games like this for the longest. It's the entire reason I would even consider picking up a looter shooter to begin with, because if the looting and leveling up isn't good, then what's the point of any of this? One of the biggest selling points of the Borderlands series since its inception, and what originally got me interested as a kid in Borderlands 1, is all the different types of weapons and abilities you can use. I still remember when I was young being in awe at the idea of a game that had millions of guns you could use, with certain specific shields or weapons spawning for less than 1% of players, meaning if you were lucky enough, you could find something that almost no one else had. I just find it to be a really compelling carrot on a stick even to this day, and it makes build crafting in this series so fun because you know at any point a new legendary could spawn which could completely change how you play. And well, Borderlands 4 does a great job here too. First of all, there is a huge variety of loot to find here once again, including brand new weapon manufacturers and many returning favorites that all combine together using a new system of parts. How it works is that every weapon in Borderlands 4, especially at the higher levels, can spawn with up to 4 different licensed parts. You might find, say, a Tedium gun that can be thrown to explode that also has a Jacob's barrel that ricochets critical shots, and a Ripper magazine that you must hold down to charge up before firing full auto. All the different mixing and matching of the part system allows for an even greater variation from previous titles, but at the same time, I will say it didn't quite add as much difference as I originally thought it would. Don't get me wrong, for the most part, I like the idea, and it's done well for an initial implementation, but I would love to see even more manufacturer parts for each section of a gun that allow for really crazy and overpowered combinations. Because as it stands, usually when I see a gun with, say, an order magazine, for example, I just sigh because I know I will have to hold down the trigger to fire and burst, and I just personally don't like weapons like this in an FPS, as it results in a lot of useless loot. In Borderlands 4, for example, a lot of parts for different sections of the guns are way more impactful than others, meaning if you get a specific part in a specific section, it will always kind of overwrite everything else going on and either make you love or hate the weapon. Still though, in principle, these changes are good and mean every piece of loot you find has at least a chance at being fantastic. More than any other Borderlands game before, I was checking every item dropping from enemies, because even the greens and blues had a chance at spawning with ridiculously powerful combinations of parts, whereas in previous titles you basically only paid attention to something if it was either legendary or purple in the late game. In fact, I think this could be massively improved too if Gearbox actually unlocked more of the weapons and legendary drops to allow for even more combinations or types of roles, making the loot grind much harder as finding the perfect piece of gear would be nearly impossible, but for me, that's the whole point of playing games like this in the first place. I love when an amazing legendary, for instance in Diablo, drops at only a 1% rate, and that drop could have one of thousands of different combinations of stats, meaning getting a really good one is so impossible that actually finding one that's decent is euphoric. That's the kind of chase that makes games like this fun, those wild combinations we dream of, and Borderlands 4 has the potential to be best in class with just a couple small tweaks and additions. And this is only further exacerbated too by the new firmware system. This is a new addition to Borderlands 4 where, especially late game, you will find lots of pieces of gear that not only roll for stats and manufactured parts, but also have a chance to come attached with one of the many new firmwares. These upgrades of sorts give your character some very impactful bonuses that increase with power the more gear you have with the same firmware. So for example, every character has 5 slots of gear that they can use firmware on. Basically anything that isn't a gun, think shields, ordnance, class mods, enhancements, and rep kits. If you have more pieces of gear with that specific firmware, you get more bonuses, up to a max of 3. So on my Rafa playthrough on PC, for instance, I kept hunting for a firmware called GUFC, which lowered my action skill cooldown and gave it some extra damage, which was a huge boost to the power of my build. This means now, late game, you aren't just farming for the single best weapon and shield you can find, but you're also looting through every blue or even green and white item to find firmware upgrades that might make your character better. It's a genius change in my opinion, and essentially has brought things like set items from competitors to Borderlands, which I think is a welcome addition, and makes the grind for loot late game, even after the campaign, so great. Speaking of late game as well, Borderlands 4 has introduced UVH, or Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, which allows you to increase the game's difficulty and find better loot by completing a set of challenges, aka beating a previous mission with new modifiers, or fighting and defeating vault monsters and bosses with souped up powers. In my opinion, it's a great way to handle endgame, and for me at least, has kept me happy and interested in improving my characters step by step. And in addition, it lends itself to easy additions with DLC and future content updates, where new raid bosses could be a thing you have to defeat to reach higher levels of UVH, and those higher levels could include new gear, new enemy types, new regions, and a whole host of modifiers that change up the game. Another cool idea would be adding firmware that can go up to higher levels, like say a level 5 firmware that's really rare, and if you get all your pieces with it, you become a god. And by the way, that's not even to mention the addition of specialization trees, where even after hitting max level, you will be gaining XP to acquire new power-ups, essentially an entirely new skill tree each character can use to refine their build. The in-game setup definitely needs some work as of release, like some more interesting challenges in UVH more akin to what I suggested, or more truly difficult bosses, but for the most part, the actual structure behind the in-game and all the options afforded to you are fantastic. I've been loving my time playing Borderlands 4 even past level 50 just as much as the run-up. And by the way, that's not even touching on the absolutely fantastic skill trees this time around that are awesome. You see, each Vault Hunter gets to pick from 3 different expansive skill trees where you can assign a point every time you level up, and it vastly changes how you even play one character. For example, the main Vault Hunter I played on PC, Rafa, has an action ability called Peacebreaker Cannons that I loved using, which allows you to simply hit a button as turrets prop up on your shoulder and fire at everything on sight. Even in just this one action from a single skill tree on a single character, there was so much variety. I could get modifications that allowed my cannons to crit constantly, others that gave me regenerating ammo, some that caused massive fireball explosions or shot rockets, and even one that let me strip the turrets off my back and use them as a more traditional stationary machine gun on the ground that shoots grenades I have equipped. Even with just one skill tree, there are so many different ways to play and alter your style, and I personally think in games like this, that's so important. Solid and fun gameplay can't carry you through thousands of hours on its own. You need something else too. And in the case of Borderlands, instead of that being competitive multiplayer and a ranking system, it's the best skills and character progression the series has seen by a long shot. I mean, even smaller things too, like how you refight bosses and grind for loot is so much better here. With the new Moxie's Big Encore machines, you simply just walk your way to a boss zone once now, and then can endlessly fight them over and over again in search of better loot. In-game also consists of weekly hardcore versions of these bosses with better loot, as well as hidden vending machines and a repeatable quest with big rewards. And when you combine this all together, the actual process of finding new upgrades and theory crafting about how to improve your character during and after the campaign is a true joy. And we already know they're going to be adding 2 more Vault Hunters on top of the 4 we already have, which means there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of hours to be spent playing this game just thinking about what skills you want to take. I cannot express just how much fun I had and am having figuring out builds and upgrading each of my characters, as even one good class mod, shield, ordnance, or weapon can completely change how you play. However, all of this glowing praise aside, there is one huge issue with this entire setup right now, something that, as of writing this at least, greatly affects every aspect. late for that now. For as fun as Borderlands 4 is, there is one big issue I'm having with it. This. No matter how much joy I have, every time I open this Forsaken screen, it just gets worse. And that's because for all the things Borderlands 4 does right, its user interface and experience is such a roadblock currently. First of all, despite how pretty it looks, the biggest gripe I have with the menus is the speed. Maybe it's my software engineer side coming out, but in user interfaces, opening and closing quickly is key. And while Borderlands 4 is by no means exceptionally slow, the fact that it takes a couple seconds to open my inventory or the map is devastating in practice. In a game where you're constantly picking up and finding new loot or items, having to wait more than a millisecond for a menu to pop up really starts to weigh on you over time. And the thing is, this wouldn't actually be that big of an issue if there were other ways to compare and contrast items. Like when I find a new shield on the ground and it looks good, but I need to double check what I already have on, the entire process is maddening. I have to open up my main menu, go to the inventory, go to shields, open the shields inventory, find the shield I want out of potentially dozens I've already picked up, and then click on the compare button just so I can see what I have equipped versus what I potentially want to change to. A flow like this is baffling in a game like Borderlands because it makes you wonder how the devs managed to play the game during testing and not complain about it to themselves. It's really as simple as just adding an auto compare feature in the settings menu that automatically shows you a comparison of your current weapon or item versus what's on the ground without having to open the menu. However, for as annoying as things like this are, I'm not too worried about it. These are things that can get patched out in time and fixed, where even if, say, the speed of the general interface isn't improved over time, new features can tie up the rest. Problems like this are all over though, and it does start to cause problems. For example, on class mods, you can see a picture of which abilities are being increased, but you have no idea what those abilities do without going into your skill tree and literally finding them amongst a sea of so many, or just equipping the new item and then checking on your skill tab to see which ones got bumped. Or what about storing class mods in the first place? As it stands, you have to find items, tag them, store them into a jumbled mess in your bank for later, and then one by one take them out and transfer them to new items for your build late game. I mentioned earlier how for my Rafa build, I was hunting for the GUFC firmware to make me stronger. Well, what I didn't mention was while the hunt for these drops was certainly fun, storing and actually transferring them was anything but, and even resulted in me accidentally selling some items I didn't mean to. Why isn't there a system, for example, to just extract all firmware from junk or marked items and then have a separate tab in the bank for each of these firmwares with just a little counter over them, and then whenever you go to any extractor, auto pull from your stored banked firmware and transfer them immediately? And the tedium and confusion doesn't stop there either. Even the idea of trying to play a different character outside of your main becomes cumbersome because you have to literally rediscover every point of interest on the map, completely upgrade your SDU slots for increased ammo and bank slots from scratch, and play through every single mission again for every character you start. Things like this should be unlocked account-wide, so making new characters is focused on the fun aspects of the loot grind, not the boring filler over and over. And these small grievances really add up, and it makes me wish the game had a little more time in the oven before release to tie up loose ends. And speaking of more time too, the performance is oftentimes abysmal. I'm running a 4090 graphics card on my PC, and even it struggles at the higher settings and high frame rates, and while the game certainly looks good, it's running way more poorly than any similarly beautiful titles. And don't even get me started on console performance, where even on a PS5 Pro, I am dipping under 60 frames, which from a PC elitist like myself is basically equivalent to burning your eyeballs out. Again though, these things will get patched and improved in time, and I'm sure in a couple years from now, with all the DLCs and patches, Borderlands 4 will be much easier to run with less of a headache trying to navigate the menus and user interface. In fact, that's one of the biggest reasons I named my review series Before You Die, because small grievances like this get patched out and improved over time. For example, some of these issues are obviously just oversights, like how bank SDU slots don't carry over between characters, but your actual bank stash does, or in other words, on new characters you make, you can take items out of the bank, but you'll never be able to put anything back in until you fully upgrade your SDU slots for the bank to what they were on your main character as well. This obviously isn't how the system was intended to work, and I'm sure a year from now, once again, it will be a long forgotten gripe. Because you see, while I think it's important to point out issues in the context of what I experienced while playing a game, this isn't the legacy it will likely have forever. And to me, doesn't factor into the larger question really of whether you should play this game before you die. Do I want games to be awesome and not broken on release? Sure, but honestly, I'll take a broken game that is a beautiful masterpiece that gets fixed over time and just be patient, rather than just something that runs well but is okay day one. To me, reviewing games is more of a focus on art, meaning, mechanics, or thought-provoking ideas or moments and gameplay elements that leave you with a smile on your face or a fire in your soul. So for as annoying and tedious as many of the issues in Borderlands 4 are, I don't think they stop you from loving the game currently, and I think in a year or two from now, they will not even be grievances at all. It's the same reason I was screaming at everyone on this channel that Cyberpunk 2077 was a masterpiece even on release, because if you looked past what it was on the surface, bugs and all, there was something really beautiful there. And I think Borderlands 4 in many ways is a similar case, albeit this time from a mechanics and gameplay standpoint, not story. Because next up, we need to talk about another thing I didn't particularly love that will actually be everlasting: the main story's writing, themes, and characters.
Saved me.
I want to start by saying Borderlands 4 has much better writing than Borderlands 3. Like many people, I found the third installment in the series fun from a gameplay perspective, but sorely lacking and very cringy in writing at times. Now, that's not to say I totally agree with everyone. I enjoyed my time with Borderlands 3 a lot. I thought it had a great setup for a main narrative and some really breathtaking environments. And I think by contrast, many people have rose-tinted glasses with how cringy and overbearing even Borderlands 2 could be at times. That game was basically single-handedly carried by Handsome Jack, one of the most memorable and best villains ever. Borderlands 4, by comparison, weirdly almost reminds me the most of Borderlands 1. Enemies in the main campaign especially are more serious while still allowing for some comedic relief, and themes and storytelling are increasingly mature, with themes of torture and abuse being talked about alongside the more silly sexual innuendos of say a 2 and 3. And hell, even the music oftentimes has a throaty, almost tribal Mad Max vibe that the first game had and was never seen since, at least until now. It's clear that the developers wanted to strike a more serious tone while maintaining the Borderlands humor, and I have to say, in that sense, I think they nailed it. Even the idea of the main setup, that being a war between the Order's autonomous robots ruled over by the Timekeeper versus the Rippers, warriors who have literally ripped out the Timekeeper's mind control devices from their own heads in retaliation, is really compelling and brutal on the face of it. And from a purely thematic perspective, I enjoyed this campaign and writing much more than 1 and 3 with a tie-up compared to 2. However, that isn't to say it's all good. For example, there are still plenty of awkward moments like this. Seeing Zane not fire a weapon after a long fight beforehand, or a cutscene that's in 30 FPS with strange and disjointed animations, feels unprofessional. And the main campaign of Borderlands 4 is full of moments like this. Don't get me wrong, I love a lot of the characters we meet here like Zane and Levane, Rush, and of course Claptrap, but intermixed with a lot of the good moments is some more amateur writing and presentation. If you play a game like, say, God of War or Cyberpunk 2077 and then play this, the acting and drama just falls so flat that it's comical. A great example to illustrate my point is one of the final missions in the Fade Fields where you must storm Idolater Soul's main base and take him out. The run-up to this moment is absolutely awesome. You get to fight alongside your fellow Crimson Resistance fighters who've sworn to stop the Timekeeper and push through an entire base, fighting behind a massive truck as it slowly inches forward. It's a really epic moment and fun as hell to play, but then you get to an elevator and have to sit through the most generic, roll your eyes moments where first you lose one of your troops and then you must push forward with just Rush, after which he sacrifices himself, of course, like you expected, and then turns out to be alive anyways, like you expected.
I've got you.
It's not a bad scene. I do love Rush as a character, and honestly, for Borderlands, it's pretty good. It's not horrible. But that's the issue. For Borderlands, it's good. Maybe I'm just getting more cynical with age and because I've seen so many things in games and movies, but this entire sequence when I was playing, I was just thinking to myself, could this plot get any more predictable? Now again, that doesn't mean it's horrible. This section of the game was actually pretty good, and that's why I wanted to show it. It's just a great analogy to the entire main story overall. Really awesome moments, decent setups, cool and interesting fights, great gunplay and boss encounters, followed by pure confusion in the writing department, despite it being an improvement from the last games and a step up. The biggest offender of this too is by the end, I literally had no idea who the timekeeper was in the finale. He started talking about things I wasn't aware of, using powers that were barely alluded to before, and worst of all, I just realized I didn't care. It felt like the bosses you fight leading up to the timekeeper were way too disjointed from the main themes, and despite the fact that you essentially are building up a dream team army to go up against the timekeeper, in the end, you barely all help each other to do just little small things. Each section of the map from a main story perspective feels like its own island and self-contained narrative that's supposed to feed into this grand whole, but never does. Like take the Crimson Resistance for example, these fearless freedom fighters who want to liberate their planet from the grasp of this evil monster, only to basically never have any sort of effect on the world after Idolater Soul dies and some of them escape off planet in a ship. Like, where did these guys go? Why aren't they helping in this big final battle that's really epic with so many moving parts? They just kind of disappear and come up on comms a little bit here and there. The final act of this game could have been so much better if the three factions in the Fade Fields, Carcadia Burn, and Terminus Range all came together in a more meaningful way in one final fight. But as it stands, it's just a massive rush to a boss that basically has no personality whatsoever, and by the time you meet him, you realize you have no idea what's going on or why anything's happening. Just so much lost opportunity. Or in other words, these villains weren't as cringy as the previous cast, but that doesn't mean I cared about them anymore. In fact, the only villain here that actually could be decent in theory is RJ, as he gets quite a bit of backstory from appearing in the prologue, and his voice and demeanor could lend themselves to a handsome Jack-like presence of a character that's losing his mind but has a good heart deep down that's simply been treated horribly. The type of tragic character that might end up being great in future games or DLC, but only time will tell. By contrast though, and outside of all of this, I really liked the companions in each zone as they were heroic and funny, while also being pretty one-dimensional and predictable. Now, to be fair, I didn't come to Borderlands 4 expecting Shakespeare, but deep down, I was kind of hoping it would be, and truthfully, if Borderlands 4 had nailed the main story with intricate and deep themes and writing, this game could have hit legendary status in my eyes. But alas, what we're left here is a game that won't move you or make you think, but it will certainly guarantee you have a lot of fun, and I won't deny that even during the bafflingly bad cutscenes or villains that were just never explained or built up in any meaningful way, I didn't really mind that much. I was just here to shoot stuff and have fun. My recommendation is don't expect too much from this main story and just sit back and relax. It has some decent emotional moments it tries at, and if you're hungry for some more well-written and awesome stories in this game, luckily, there is one place. Borderlands 4, more than any of the other Borderlands games, heavily focuses on the side content. Initially, this scared me not only because I saw so many things on the map to do, but also because the main story felt just a little lackluster in writing to me, as I've already noted, and the idea of having to do so many side quests that likely were worse would have been a death sentence to a title like this. But to my surprise, the side quests in Borderlands 4 are far and away the best writing this title has. These stories range from wild and wacky, like helping a man who breeds with threshers, to more heartfelt or truly captivating, including an early quest that sees you hunting down a serial killer on the loose. Many of these side quest lines too extend on for hours and hours over multiple different missions and characters. For example, there was a long-running set of side quests in Carcadia Burn involving Penelope Cruz, a reporter trying to gain fame where you run around all in the area helping her hunt down good news stories, and it results in some truly epic moments, great loot, and a fully unique boss fight unlike anything else in the game, where right at the end, you fight a literal vending machine to the death. Things like this to me are what Borderlands is all about. Insane or hilarious story setups with an occasional heartfelt beat that feels so satisfying and digestible while providing playful commentary on the gaming industry or our real world as a whole. A great example of this was one of my favorite side quests, which included 9 minutes of dialogue by a single character that was nothing but esoteric lore dumps and vapid explanations of insane topics that's supposed to be a playful joke and nod to From Software and their style of storytelling in games, where things are just obscure to be obscure. Another favorite of mine was watching as Claptrap slowly came to the realization that a robot he reprogrammed to love him had become clingy and he had to put her down. The side quests just have so many clever jokes like this, or even small glimpses of heart that make you actually stop and take it all in. And I think the reason the Gearbox team pulled off the side quests so well, but not the main story, is because they're just more digestible. It's easier to make a short story immediately captivating or interesting, and to just add on to it with multiple side quests that tie together, rather than one giant narrative like a main quest that needs to stay relevant for dozens of hours. So while the main story and writing in Borderlands 4 fell flat for me despite some improvements, as I said, it's the side quests where this team really shines, and I think without a doubt where all of the most memorable moments I had playing this game happen. Hell, half the side quests lead you to new areas or bosses too, so there is no reason not to do them, and they practically save the writing in a game that otherwise would have fallen a little short. Lastly, I want to quickly touch on one final big change that Borderlands 4 made for the series and my thoughts on it. You see, for as long as Borderlands has been around, it's been based on the idea of linear levels and environments. Sure, some of the zones in the games are semi-open world or extremely expansive, allowing for lots of traversal, but never to the extent that Borderlands 4 has gone. And that's because in Borderlands 4, the entire experience is almost all set in an expansive open world map, with only a couple main story missions taking you to more traditional linear levels full of bosses. It's quite the big change, and one that mixes up the gameplay loop quite a bit, and it's something that I was quite apprehensive about at first. You see, lately, I've grown tired of open world games and all the meaningless busy work they give you that just feels pointless. That Ubisoft formula of an open world, or even say Ghost of Tsushima, just doesn't work for me. And it might be the game type I have the most issues with and find the most boring right now, because it often feels like I'm completely wasting my time doing content that isn't at the same level or quality as the main stuff. Luckily in Borderlands 4 though, even the more mundane things like trying to find collectibles feels rewarding, because the main driving force behind even playing this game is the combat and exploration. So just walking around and shooting things is kind of the whole point. Honestly, I'm just here to run around firing weapons while looking for more weapons with a beautiful backdrop. So an open world Borderlands game actually works great, and I don't feel like I ever was wasting my time within it. If anything, it actually ended up making the flow of Borderlands better, as instead of waiting between loading screens to go from one location to the next, it felt like one big, expansive, immersive planet that I could get lost in. One big issue, however, for sure though, is that in previous games, the more tight linear levels often meant more impressive skyboxes and a larger variety in what you would see. For all the complaints about Borderlands 3, for instance, I think one thing that game did fantastically was providing players with constantly new and amazing environments to fight through. Borderlands 4, by contrast, is entirely made up of 4 large zones that each in their own right are really cool, but are so expansive and massive that you will be seeing a lot of the same architecture and design everywhere you go. Oftentimes, the dungeons or quests would offer smaller areas with a bit more variety in each of these zones, but for the most part, you will either be stuck looking at green grass, gray rocks, or red rocks through your entire playthrough, with only the city at the very end of the game offering a big mix-up in setting. And the thing is, set design, architecture, and setting in games is so often underlooked and talked about. And having a huge variety of places to go and see in your game can turn something from being to amazing. So it's a bummer that Borderlands 4 only has a small handful of different environment types to see, with only short glimpses into more ethereal realms as well. Luckily, to bolster this, there is a day and night cycle and some small weather effects that definitely do add some much needed ambiance into the mix, and over time, I think even more zones will be added that really add to the catalog. Because my guess is after 2 years and a bunch of DLCs, this world will look and feel drastically different and be much more fleshed out. Outside of the gripes with variety though, I thought the open world was actually pretty awesome, as I said before. It allowed for full use of the new movement mechanics, it was easy to traverse with the fast to summon vehicles, the boss arenas and dungeons were fun to find and explore and integrated in seamlessly, sometimes even being quite expansive in their own right, and that sense of being involved in a real place, this time on Kairos, is the best in the series since each zone and area is so connected. There's just something about being able to drive my bike all the way from Terminus Range to Carcadia Burn and slowly watching as the environment and enemy types change that's so exciting and beautiful in a way. And one thing Gearbox definitely did right here was making the view distance so massive that you can see for miles in any direction. It provides a sense of scale no other Borderlands game has even gotten close to. Combat music throughout is fantastic as well and varies depending on where you are and what you're doing, sweeping in and out of scenes flawlessly, which makes the lack of ambient music by contrast seem even more confusing, and it leaves a lot to be desired, but at least when you're in combat, it sounds great. And overall, playing through this open world and trying to get all the collectibles, finding all the dungeons, and beating all the quests was a great time. I enjoyed being able to see something in the distance and always knowing that as Skyrim popularized back in 2011, I could go there. Whereas so many other open worlds fall flat for me because they feel like they would be better served by linear levels that make the storytelling more impactful, it works perfectly in Borderlands as a looter shooter because when you play Borderlands, it's easier to just turn your brain off and shoot anything that comes into your path while driving around at breakneck speeds. So honestly, I was quite surprised with just how much I enjoyed the open world aspect of Borderlands 4. I thought I would hate the change, but ended up thinking that while it did sacrifice some things, overall it was the right decision, and the lack of loading screens is a welcome addition once that performance finally gets sorted out. But that brings us to the most important question of all, and the reason you're watching this video in the first place. Is Borderlands 4 the type of game you should play before you die? Well, definitely. This may be some of the most fun I've ever had in a looter shooter. The mechanics are great, the gunplay and movement is fantastic, build variety and RPG mechanics are quite deep even from an initial release, and the potential for new abilities, guns, or interactions to be added to this game is practically endless. Despite all the flaws it does have, most of these are things that can be improved and fixed and quite quickly as well. And in coming years with a couple big DLCs, this could without a doubt be the best Borderlands and probably the best looter shooter I've ever played. And I've played a ton of them too, and even just general looters as well, including Destiny, Diablo, Outriders, Path of Exile, Last Epoch, Warframe, and one of my favorites of all time that I have to shout out here because it never gets enough love, Remnant 2. That game is awesome, more people need to play it. But Borderlands 4, I think at least as a base product compared to these other games as a base product, has topped them all. I could see myself playing this for years to come, and every time I've loaded up the game, I'm instantly hit with a jolt of dopamine just running around and firing my weapons. And in a way, what more could you ask for from a Borderlands game? It's addictive, deep, and filled to the brim with content that can keep you busy for hours and hours. And also, as I mentioned, it has so much potential for a really riveting endgame, and if the Gearbox team continues to add more and more content over the next couple years, this will without a doubt be one of the greats. Again though, it's not perfect. At times, the humor can still be a little much, the main story in my opinion is lackluster, and the characters, especially the villains, are very forgettable. But honestly, I don't think that's what Borderlands needs to be great. For me, Borderlands is all about the amazing guns and builds, the fast-paced combat, and a world full of wacky and zany things and funny moments, which are plentiful here in the side content. It's not often I continue to play a game long after I've beaten it, but in the case of Borderlands, that thrill of finding the next big drop or just shooting bad guys never gets stale. And I'm eagerly awaiting the upcoming DLCs and content drops to see what else this team has in store. And if I had one big desire I can put out there, it's for more difficult or challenging encounters or huge bosses and long raids that really put our builds to the test. But obviously these are things that will come in time, and I hope by then this game is still really popular because it deserves to be. So while Borderlands 4 didn't make me think like some titles, and it didn't revolutionize an entire genre, to me, in many ways, it perfected it. And I can fully recommend this game to anyone that's even remotely on the fence, as there is a ton here to fall in love with, and it's the type of game that you can always come back to and enjoy like comfort food while you wait for the next best thing. Not every game we play before we die has to be thought-provoking or introspective. Sometimes they are just a lot of fun. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. This is now only my second review for the Before You Die series, and I'm really enjoying doing these so far, so I hope you guys are enjoying watching as well. Let me know down below what you want to see me cover in the future and things you think I could do in this series that you would find interesting, as it's still so early on that I'm sure a lot of feedback will change how it progresses over the years. But as always, until next time.